You're listening to KZOM, Oleander Public Radio.
Welcome to Innsmouth, stranger.
Hi, I'm Rob Whiten from the Innsmouth Book Club. Join me and my fellow guide John Chadwick as we take you on a fortnightly tour of Innsmouth. We visit places such as the Picture House, the Library and Innsmouth Museum to discuss all aspects of weird fiction, whether it be book, film, music, TV or art. As well as that, we stop over at the Gilman House to have a chat with a resident guest. That includes authors, artists, musicians, in fact Lovecraftian creatives of all types. You can find our free shows on Patreon, and there you can also sign up as a patron, which brings you bonus content, plus a monthly PDF copy of Innsmouth News, which features articles, author spotlights, all the latest news and reviews, and more. You can find us at patreon.com/InnsmouthBC. We hope to see you soon, because remember, Innsmouth isn't just a place, it's a state of mind.
Use MRP 5KM D6 to get 10%. Welcome to the world of Conquest. Immerse yourself in the epic battles and strategic warfare with our two thrilling tabletop miniature games. Conquest, The Last Argument of Kings, a rank-and-file wargame, and Conquest, First Blood, a skirmish game. What makes these games even more exciting is that you can use the same miniatures to play both. Conquest, First Blood, our gripping skirmish game. With First Blood, you can experience the intense, fast-paced battles on a smaller scale while still utilizing the same meticulously crafted miniatures from your collection. So whether you're a seasoned war strategist or a newcomer eager to embark on your first conquest, the world of Conquest offers you endless possibilities. Gather your forces, hone your tactics, and prepare yourself for the ultimate test of skill and strategy across both The Last Argument of Kings and First Blood. The battlefield awaits. Go to pgttcm.com or the show notes to find out more. Get 10% off all orders by entering code MRP5KMD6. That's MRP5KMD6. That's MRP5KMD6. Get 10% off all books, miniatures, and more. Or go to PGTTCM or the show notes to find out more.
The Book of the Damned by Charles Fort, Chapter 10. Early explorers have Florida mixed up with Newfoundland, but the confusion is worse than that still earlier. It arises from simplicity. Very early explorers think that all land westward is one land, India. Awareness of other lands as well as India comes as a slow process. I do not now think of things arriving upon this earth from some especial other world. That was my notion when I started to collect our data. Or, as is a commonplace of observation, all intellection begins with the illusion of homogeneity. It's one of Spencer's data. We see homogeneousness in all things distant, or with which we have small acquaintance. Advance from the relatively homogeneous to the relatively heterogeneous is Spencerian philosophy, like everything else so-called. Not that it was really Spencer's discovery, but was taken from von Baer, who in turn was continuous with preceding evolutionary speculation. Our own expression is that all things are acting to advance to the homogeneous, or are trying to localize homogeneousness. Homogeneousness is an aspect of the universal, wherein it is a state that does not merge away into something else. We regard homogeneousness as an aspect of positiveness, but it is our acceptance that infinite frustrations of attempts to positivize manifest themselves in infinite heterogeneity, so that though things try to localize homogeneousness, they end up in heterogeneity so great that it amounts to infinite dispersion or indistinguishability. So all concepts are little attempted positivenesses, but soon have to give in to compromise, modification, nullification, merging away into the indistinguishability, unless, here and there, in the world's history, there may have been a super-dogmatist who, for only an infinitesimal of time, has been able to hold out against heterogeneity, or modification, or doubt, or, quote, listening to reason, end quote, or loss of identity, in which case, instant translation to heaven, or the positive absolute. Odd thing about Spencer is that he never recognized that homogeneity, integration, and definiteness are all words for the same state, or the state that we call positiveness. What we call his mistake is in that he regarded homogeneousness as negative. I began with a notion of some one other world, from which objects and substances have fallen to this earth, which had, or which, to less degree, has a tutelary interest in this earth, which is now attempting to communicate with this earth, modifying, because of data which will pile up later, into acceptance that some other world is not attempting, but has been, for centuries, in communication with a sect, perhaps, or a secret society, or certain esoteric ones of this earth's inhabitants. I lose a great deal of hypnotic power in not being able to concentrate attention upon some one other world. As I have admitted before, I'm intelligent, as contrasted with the orthodox. I haven't the aristocratic disregard of a New York curator or an Eskimo medicine man. I have to dissipate myself in acceptance of a host of other worlds, size of the moon, some of them, one of them at least, tremendous thing. We'll take that up later. Vast, amorphous aerial regions, to which such definite words as worlds and planets seem inapplicable, and artificial constructions that I have called superconstructions, one of them about the size of Brooklyn, I should say, offhand, and one or more of them wheel-shaped things, a goodly number of square miles in area. I think that earlier in this book, before we liberalized into embracing everything that comes along, your indignation, or indigestion, would have expressed in the notion that, if this were so, astronomers would have seen these other worlds and regions and vast geometric constructions. You'd have that notion. You'd have had that notion. You'd have stopped there. But the attempt to stop is saying enough to the insatiable. In cosmic punctuation, there are no periods. Illusions of periods is incomplete view of colons and semicolons. We can't stop with the notion that if there were such phenomena, astronomers would have seen them. Because of our experience with suppression and disregard, we suspect, before we go into the subject at all, that astronomers have seen them, that navigators and meteorologists have seen them, that individual scientists and other trained observers have seen them many times, that it is the system that has excluded data of them. As to the law of gravitation and astronomers' formulas, remember that these formulas worked out in the time of Laplace as well as they do now. But there are hundreds of planetary bodies now known that were then not known. So a few hundred worlds more of ours won't make any difference. Laplace knew about only 30 bodies in this solar system. About 600 are recognized now. What are the discoveries of geology and biology to a theologian? his formulas still work out as well as they ever did. If the law of gravitation could be stated as a real utterance, it might be a real resistance to us. But we are told only that gravitation is gravitation. Of course, to an intermediatist, nothing can be defined except in terms of itself. But even the orthodox, in what seems to me to be the innate premonitions of realness, not founded upon experience, agree that to define a thing in terms of itself is not real definition. It is said that by gravitation is meant the attraction of all things proportionately to mass and inversely as the square of the distance. Mass would mean inter-attraction holding together final particles, if there were final particles. Then, until final particles be discovered, only one term of this expression survives, or mass is attraction. But distance is only extent of mass, unless one holds out for absolute vacuum among planets, a position against which we could bring a host of data. But there is no possible means of expressing that gravitation is anything other than attraction. So there is nothing to resist us but such a phantom as that gravitation is the gravitation of all gravitations, proportionately to gravitation and inversely as the square of gravitation. In quasi-existence, nothing more sensible than this can be said upon any so-called subject. Perhaps there are higher approximations to ultimate sensibleness. Nevertheless, we seem to have a feeling that with the system against us, we have a kind of resistance here. We'd have felt so formerly, at any rate. I think that Dr. Gray's and Professor Hitchcock's have modified our trustfulness toward indistinguishability. As to the perfection of this system that quasi-opposes us, and the infallibility of its mathematics, as if there could be real mathematics in a mode of seeming where twice two are not four, we've been told over and over of their vindication in the discovery of Neptune. I'm afraid that the course we're taking will turn out like every other development. We began humbly, admitting that we're of the damned, but our eyebrows, just a faint flicker in them, or in one of them, every time we hear of the, quote, triumphal discovery of Neptune, end quote, this, quote, monumental achievement of theoretical astronomy, end quote, as the textbooks call it. The whole trouble is that we've looked it up. The textbooks omit this, that instead of the orbit of Neptune agreeing with the calculations of Adams and Leverrier, it was so different that Leverrier said that it was not the planet of his calculations. Later, it was thought best to say no more upon that subject. The textbooks omit this, that in 1846, everyone who knew a sine from a cosine was out sining and cosigning for a planet beyond Uranus. 2 of them guessed right. To some minds, even after Leverrier's own rejection of Neptune, the word guessed may be objectionable. But according to Professor Pierce of Harvard, the calculations of Adams and Leverrier would have applied quite as well to positions many degrees from the position of Neptune. Or for Professor Pierce's demonstration that the discovery of Neptune was only a, quote, happy accident, end quote, see the Proceedings of the American Academy of Sciences, 1-65. For references, see Lowell's Evolution of Worlds. Or comets, another nebulous resistance to our own notions. As to eclipses, I have notes upon several of them that did not occur upon scheduled time, though with differences only of seconds, and one delightful lost soul, deep buried, but buried in the ultra-respectable records of the Royal Astronomical Society, upon an eclipse that did not occur at all. That delightful, ultra-sponsored thing of perdition is too good and malicious to be dismissed with passing notice. We'll have him later. Throughout the history of astronomy, every comet that has come back upon predicted time, not that, essentially, there was anything more abstruse about it than is a prediction that you can make of a postman's periodicities tomorrow, was advertised for all it was worth. It's the way reputations are worked up for fortune-tellers by the faithful. The comets that didn't come back, omitted or explained. Or Encke's comet. It came back slower and slower, but the astronomers explained. Be almost absolutely sure of that. They explained. They had it all worked out and formulated and proved why that comet was coming back slower and slower. And there the damn thing began coming faster and faster. Halley's comet. Astronomy, quote, the perfect science, as we astronomers like to call it, end quote. Jacobi. It's my own notion that if, in a real existence, an astronomer could not tell one longitude from another, he'd be sent back to this purgatory of ours until he could meet that simple requirement. Halley was sent to the Cape of Good Hope to determine its longitude. He got it degrees wrong. He gave to Africa's noble Roman promontory a retroussé twist that would take the pride out of any Kaffir. We hear everlastingly of Halley's comet. It came back. Maybe. But unless we look the matter up in contemporaneous records, we hear nothing of the Leonids, for instance. But the same methods are those by which Halley's comet was predicted. The Leonids were predicted. November 1898. No Leonids. It was explained. They had been perturbed. They would appear in November 1899. November 1899. November 1900. No Leonids. My notion of astronomic accuracy. Who could not be a prize marksman if only his hits be recorded? As to Halley's comet of 1910, everybody now swears he saw it. He has to perjure himself, otherwise he'd be accused of having no interest in great, inspiring things that he's never given any attention to. Regard this, that there never is a moment when there is not some comet in the sky. Virtually, there is no year in which several new comets are not discovered, so plentiful are they. Luminous fleas on a vast black dog. In popular impressions, there is no realization of the extent to which this solar system is flea-bitten. If a comet have not the orbit that astronomers have predicted, perturbed. If, like Halley's comet, it be late, even a year late, perturbed. When a train is an hour late, we have small opinion of the predictions of timetables. When a comet's a year late, all we ask is that it be explained. We hear of the inflation and arrogance of astronomers. My own acceptance is not that they are imposing upon us, that they are requiting us. For many of us priests no longer function to give a seeming report with perfection. Infallibility, the positive absolute. Astronomers have stepped forward to fill a vacancy, with quasi-phantomosity, but in our acceptance, with a higher approximation to substantiality than had the attenuations that preceded them. I should say myself that all that we call progress is not so much response to urge as it is response to a hiatus. Or, if you want something to grow somewhere, dig out everything else in its area. So, I have to accept that the positive assurances of astronomers are necessary to us, or the blunderings, evasions, and disguises of astronomers would never be tolerated. That, given such latitude as they are permitted to take, they could not be very disastrously mistaken. Suppose the comet called Halley's had not appeared. Early in 1910, a far more important comet than the anemic luminosity said to be Halley's appeared. It was so brilliant that it was visible in daylight. The astronomers would have been saved anyway, if this other comet did not have the predicted orbit perturbation. If you're going to Coney Island and predict there'll be a special kind of a pebble on the beach, I don't see how you can disgrace yourself if some other pebble will do just as well. Because the feeble thing said to have been seen in 1910 was no more in accord with the sensational description given out by astronomers in advance than is a pale pebble with a brick-red boulder. I predict that next Wednesday, a large Chinaman in evening clothes will cross Broadway at 42nd Street at 9 p.m. He doesn't, but a tubercular Jap in a sailor's uniform does cross Broadway at 35th Street Friday at noon. Well, a Jap is a perturbed Chinaman, and clothes are clothes. I remember the terrifying predictions made by the honest and credulous astronomers, who must have been themselves hypnotized, or they could not have hypnotized the rest of us, in 1909. Wills were made. Human life might be swept from this planet. In quasi-existence, which is essentially Hibernian, that would be no reason why wills should not be made. The less excitable of us did expect at least some pretty good fireworks. I have to admit that it is said that in New York a light was seen in the sky. It was about as terrifying as the scratch of a match on the seat of some breeches half a mile away. It was not on time. Though I have heard that a faint nebulosity, which I did not see myself, though I looked when I was told to look, was seen in the sky. It appeared several days after the time predicted. A hypnotized host of imbeciles of us told to look up at the sky. We did, like a lot of pointers hypnotized by a partridge. The effect? Almost everybody now swears that he saw Halley's comet, and that it was a glorious spectacle. An interesting circumstance here is that seemingly we are trying to discredit astronomers because astronomers oppose us. That is not my impression. We shall be in the Brahmin caste of the hell of the Baptists. Almost all our data, in some regiments of dispossession, are observations by astronomers. Few of them mere amateur astronomers. It is the system that opposes us. It is the system that is suppressing astronomers. I think we pity them in their captivity. Ours is not malice, in a positive sense. It's chivalry, somewhat. Unhappy astronomers looking out from high towers in which they are imprisoned, we appear upon the horizon. But, as I have said, our data do not relate to some especial other world. I mean very much what a savage upon an ocean island might vaguely think of in his speculations. Not upon some other land, but complexes of continents and their phenomena. Cities, factories in cities, means of communication. Now, all the other savages would know of a few vessels sailing in their regular routes, passing this island in regularized periodicities. The tendency in these minds would be expression of the universal tendency towards positivism, or completeness, or conviction that these few regularized vessels constituted all. Now, I think of some especial savage who suspects otherwise, because he is very backward and unimaginative and insensible to the beautiful ideals of the others, not piously occupied, like others, in bowing before impressive-looking sticks of wood, dishonestly taking time for his speculations, while the others are patriotically witch-finding. So the other higher and nobler savages know about the few regularized vessels, know when to expect them, have their periodicities all worked out, just about when the vessels will pass, or eclipse each other, explaining that all vagaries were due to atmospheric conditions. They'd come out strong in explaining. You can't read a book upon savages without noting what resolute explainers they are. They'd say that all this mechanism was founded upon the mutual attraction of the vessels, deduced from the fall of a monkey from a palm tree, or if not that devils were pushing the vessels, something of the kind. Storms, debris, not from the vessels, cast up by the waves, disregarded. How can one think of something and something else too? I'm in the state of mind of a savage who might find upon a shore, washed up by the same storm, buoyant parts of a piano and a paddle that was carved by cruder hands than his own, something light and summery from India, and a fur overcoat from Russia. Or all science, though approximating wider and wider, is attempt to conceive of India in terms of an ocean island, and of Russia in terms of India, so interpreted. Though I am trying to think of Russia and India in worldwide terms, I cannot think that or the universalizing of the local is cosmic purpose. The higher idealist is the positivist who tries to localize the universal, and is in accord with cosmic purpose. The super-dogmatist of a local savage who can hold out, without a flurry of doubt, that a piano washed up on a beach is the trunk of a palm tree that a shark has bitten, leaving his teeth in it. So we fear for the soul of Dr. Gray, because he did not devote his whole life to that one stand that, whether possible or inconceivable, thousands of fishes had been cast from one bucket. So, unfortunately for myself, if salvation be desirable, I look out widely, but amorphously, indefinitely, and heterogeneously. If I say I conceive of another world that is now in secret communication with certain esoteric inhabitants of this earth, I say I conceive of still other worlds that are trying to establish communication with all the inhabitants of this earth. I fit my notions to the data I find. That is supposed to be the right and logical and scientific thing to do. But it is no way to approximate to form, system, organization. Then I think I conceive of other worlds and vast structures that pass us by, within a few miles, without the slightest desire to communicate, quite as tramp vessels pass many islands without particularizing one from another. Then I think I have data of a vast construction that has often come to this earth, dipped into an ocean, submerged there a while, then going away. Why? I'm not absolutely sure. How would an Eskimo explain a vessel sending ashore for coal, which is plentiful upon some Arctic beaches, though of unknown use to the natives, then sailing away with no interest in the natives? A great difficulty is trying to understand vast constructions that show no interest in us. The notion that we must be interesting. I accept that, though we're usually avoided, probably for moral reasons. Sometimes this earth has been visited by explorers. I think that the notion that there have been extra-mundane visitors to China within what we call the historic period will be only ordinarily absurd when we come to that datum. I accept that some of the other worlds are of conditions very similar to our own. I think of others that are very different, so that visitors from them could not live here without artificial adaptations. How some of them could breathe our attenuated air if they come from a gelatinous atmosphere. Masks. The masks that have been found in ancient deposits. Most of them are of stone, and are said to have been ceremonial regalia of savages. But the mask that was found in Sullivan County, Missouri, in 1879, American Antiquarian 3-336. It is made of iron and silver. End of Chapter 10. Read by J.C. Guan. Montreal, November 2008.
The show notes, or go to pgttcm.com for more information. And also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and all the other places where podcast stuff exists. All right, back to the show.
In Legacy Door, a lurker from space casts a shadow over time.
We opened our eyes upon the human world. We found ourselves lying on an especially yielding bed in a room displaying scattered relics of their shallow past, tied together by more recently produced items meant to blend with the relics. Typical.
A sensitive journalist dreams of unknown lives.
It seems like every time I close my eyes, they get stronger. I can't even say the last time I had a normal sleep, let alone a dreamless one.
An outspoken lawyer defends the suspect in an unspeakable crime.
And that client was Jonathan Strauss, held for the murder of his daughter Abigail and her companion Harrison Reese.
And a stalwart investigator tries to drag it all into the light.
Some of the Reeses and the Strausses have been involved with something that seems to include an obsession with bloodlines and longevity for at least decades.
Legacy Door is a weekly cosmic horror mystery podcast. An ensemble of actors tell a story, also available in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. Available now.
The Book of the Damned by Charles Fort, Chapter 11. One of the damned is in our whole Saturnalia of the accursed, because it is hopeless to try to shake off an excommunication only by saying that we're damned by blacker things than ourselves, and that the damned are those who admit they're of the damned. Inertia and hypnosis are too strong for us. We say that, then we go right on, admitting we're of the damned. It is only by being more nearly real that we can sweep away the quasi-things that oppose us. Of course, as a whole, we have considerable amorphousness, but we're thinking now of individual acceptances. Wideness is an aspect of universalness or realness. If our synthesis disregard fewer data than do opposing synthesis, which are often not synthesis at all, but mere consideration of some one circumstance, less widely synthetic things fade away before us. Harmony is an aspect of the universal, by which we mean realness. If we approximate more highly to harmony among the parts of an expression and to all available circumstances of an occurrence, the self-contradictors turn hazy. Solidity is an aspect of realness. We pile them up and we pile them up, or they pass and pass and pass. Things that bulk large as they march by, supporting and solidifying one another. And still, and for regiments to come, hypnosis and inertia rule us. One of the damnedest of our data. In the Scientific American, September 10, 1910, Charles F. Holder writes, "Many years ago, a strange stone resembling a meteorite fell into the valley of the Yaqui, Mexico, and the sensational story went from one end to the other of the country that a stone bearing human inscriptions had descended to the earth." The bewildering observation here is Mr. Holder's assertion that this stone did fall. It seems to me that he must mean that it fell by dislodgment from a mountainside into a valley. But we shall see that it was such a marked stone that very unlikely would it have been unknown to dwellers in a valley if it had been reposing upon a mountainside above them. It may have been carelessness. Intent may have been to say that a sensational story of a strange stone said to have fallen, etc. The stone was reported by Major Frederick Burnham of the British Army. Later, Major Burnham revisited it, and Mr. Holder accompanied him, their purpose to decipher the inscriptions upon it, if possible. The stone was brown, igneous rock, its longest axis about 8 feet, and on the eastern face which had an angle of about 45 degrees, was the deep-cut inscription. Mr. Holder says that he recognized familiar Mayan symbols in the inscription. His method was the usual method by which anything can be identified as anything else. That is, to pick out whatever is agreeable and disregard the rest. He says that he has demonstrated that most of the symbols are Mayan. One of our intermediatist pseudo-principles is that any way of demonstrating anything is just as good a way of demonstrating anything else. By Mr. Holder's method, we could demonstrate that we're Mayan, if that should be a source of pride to us. One of the characters upon the stone is a circle within a circle. Similar character found by Mr. Holder is a Mayan manuscript. There are 2 sixes. Sixes can be found in Mayan manuscripts. A double scroll. There are dots, and there are dashes. Well, then we, in turn, disregard the circle within a circle and the double scroll and emphasize that sixes occur in this book, and that dots are plentiful, and would be more plentiful if it were customary to use the small I for the first personal pronoun, and that when it comes to dashes, that's demonstrated, we're Mayan. I suppose the tendency is to feel that we're sneering at some valuable archaeologic work, and that Mr. Holder did make a veritable identification. He writes, "I submitted the photographs to the Field Museum and the Smithsonian, and 1 or 2 others, and to my surprise, the reply was that they could make nothing out of it." Our indefinite acceptance, by preponderance of 3 or 4 groups of museum experts against 1 person, is that the stone bearing inscriptions unassimilable with any known language upon this earth is said to have fallen from the sky. Another poor wretch of an outcast belonging here is noted in the Scientific American 48-261. That of an object, or a meteorite, that fell February the 16th, 1883, near Brescia, Italy, a false report was circulated that one of the fragments bore the impress of a hand. That's all that is findable by me upon this mere gasp of a thing. Intermediatistically, my acceptance is that, though in the course of human society there have been some notable approximations, there never has been a real liar, that he could not survive in intermediateness. Where everything merges away, or has its pseudo-base in something else, will be instantly translated to the negative absolute. So my acceptance is that, though curtly dismissed, there was something to base upon in this report, that there was unusual markings upon this object. Of course, that is not to jump to the conclusion that they were cuneiform characters that looked like fingerprints. Altogether, I think that in some of our past expressions, we must have been very efficient, if the experience of Mr. Simons be typical, so indefinite are we becoming here. Just here, we're interested in many things that have been found, especially in the United States, which speak of a civilization, or of many civilizations not indigenous to this earth. One trouble is in trying to decide whether they fell here from the sky, or were left behind by visitors from other worlds. We have a notion that there have been disasters aloft, and that coins have dropped here, that inhabitants of this earth found them or saw them fall, and then made coins imitatively. It may be that coins were showered here by something of a tutelary nature that undertook to advance us from the stage of barter to the use of a medium. If coins should be identified as Roman coins, we've had so much experience with identifications that we know a phantom when we see one. But even so, how could Roman coins have got to North America, far in the interior of North America, or buried under the accumulations of centuries of soil, unless they did drop from whatever the first Romans came from? Ignatius Donnelly, in Atlantis, gives a list of objects that have been found in mounds that are supposed to antedate all European influence in America. Lace-made articles, such as traders from somewhere, would supply to savages marks of the lathe said to be unmistakable. Said to be, of course we can't accept that anything is unmistakable. In the report of the Smithsonian Institute 1881-619, there is an account by Charles C. Jones of 2 silver crosses that were found in Georgia. They are skillfully made, highly ornamented crosses, but are not conventional crucifixes, all arms of equal length. Mr. Jones is a good positivist that De Soto had halted at the precise spot where these crosses were found, but the spirit of negativeness that lurks in all things said to be precise shows itself in that upon one of these crosses is an inscription that has no meaning in Spanish or any other known terrestrial language. Yinkisidu, according to Mr. Jones. He thinks that this is a name, and that there is an aboriginal ring to it, though I should say, myself, that he was thinking of the far distant Incas, that the Spanish donor cut on the cross the name of an Indian to whom it was presented. But we look at the inscription ourselves, and see that the letters said to be C and D are turned the wrong way, and that the letter to be K is not only turned the wrong way, but is upside down. It is difficult to accept that the remarkable, the very extensive copper mines in the region of Lake Superior were ever the works of American aborigines. Despite the astonishing extent of these mines, nothing has ever been found to indicate that the region was ever inhabited by permanent dwellers. Quote, "Not a vestige of a dwelling, a skeleton, or a bone has been found." End quote. The Indians have no traditions relating to the mines. American Antiquarian 25-258. I think that we've had visitors, that they have come here for copper, for instance, as to other relics of them. But we now come upon frequency of a merger that has not so often appeared before. Fraudulency. Hair called real hair. Then there are wigs. Teeth called real teeth. Then there are false teeth. Official money, counterfeit money. It's the bane of psychic research. If there be psychic phenomena, there must be fraudulent psychic phenomena. So desperate is the situation here that Carrington argues that even if Palladino be caught cheating, that is not to say that all her phenomena are fraudulent. My own version is that nothing indicates anything in a positive sense, because in a positive sense there is nothing to be indicated. Everything that is called true must merge away indistinguishably into something called false. Both are expressions of the same underlying quasiness, and are continuous. Fraudulent antiquarian relics are very common, but they are not more common than are fraudulent paintings. W. S. Forrest, Historical Sketches of Norfolk, Virginia. That in September 1833, when some workmen near Norfolk were boring for water, a coin was drawn up from a depth of about 30 feet. It was about the size of an English shilling, but oval, an oval disc, if not a coin. The figures upon it were distinct, and represented, quote, "a warrior or hunter, and other characters apparently of Roman origin." End quote. The means of execution would probably be men digging a hole, no one else looking. One of them drops a coin into the hole. As to where he got a strange coin, remarkable in shape even, that's disregarded. Up comes the coin, expressions of astonishment from the evil one who had dropped it. However, the antiquarians have missed this coin. I can find no other mention of it. Another coin, also a little study in the genesis of a prophet. In the American Antiquarian 16-313 is copied a story by a correspondent to the Detroit News of a copper coin about the size of a 2-cent piece, said to have been found in a Michigan mound. The editor says merely that he does not endorse the find. Upon this slender basis, he buds out in the next number of the Antiquarian, quote, "The coin turns out, as we predicted, to be a fraud." End quote. You can imagine the scorn of Elijah, or any one of the old, more nearly real prophets. For all things are tried by the one kind of jurisprudence we have in quasi-existence, presumed to be innocent until convicted, but they're guilty. The editor's reasoning is as phantom-like as my own, or St. Paul's, or Darwin's. The coin is condemned because it came from the same region from which, a few years before, had come pottery that had been called fraudulent. The pottery had been condemned because it was condemnable. Scientific American, June 17, 1882. That a farmer in Cass County, Illinois, had picked up on his farm a bronze coin which was sent to Professor F.F. Hilder of St. Louis, who identified it as a coin of Antiochus IV, inscription said to be in ancient Greek characters, translated as King Antiochus Epiphanes, Illustrious, the Victorious. Sounds quite definite and convincing, but we have some more translations coming. In the American Pioneer 2-169 are shown two faces of a copper coin, with characters very much like those upon the Grave Creek stone, which, with translations, we'll take up soon. This coin is said to have been found in Connecticut in 1843. Records of the past, 12-182, that early in 1913, a coin, said to be a Roman coin, was reported as discovered in an Illinois mound. It was sent to Mr. Emerson of the Art Institute of Chicago. His opinion was that the coin is, quote, of the rare mintage of Domitius Domitianus, emperor in Egypt, end quote. As to its discovery in an Illinois mound, Dr. Emerson disclaims responsibility. But what strikes me here is that a joker should not have been satisfied with an ordinary Roman coin. Where did he get a rare coin, and why was it not missed from some collection? I have looked over numismatic journals enough to accept that the whereabouts of every rare coin in anyone's possession is known to coin collectors. Seems to me nothing left but to call this another identification. Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society, 12-224. That in July 1871, a letter was received from Mr. Jacob W. Muffet of Chillicothe, Illinois, enclosing a photograph of a coin, which he said had been brought up by him while boring from a depth of 120 feet. Of course, by conventional scientific standards, such depth has some extraordinary meaning. Paleontologists, geologists, and archaeologists consider themselves reasonable in arguing ancient origin of the far buried. We only accept. Depth is a pseudo-standard with us. One earthquake could bury a coin of recent mintage 120 feet below the surface. According to a writer in the proceedings, the coin is uniform in thickness, and had never been hammered out by savages. Quote, "There are other tokens of the machine shop." End quote. But, according to Professor Leslie, it is an astrologic amulet. Quote, "There are upon it the signs of Pisces and Leo." End quote. Or, with due disregard, you can find signs of your great-grandmother, or of the Crusades, or of the Mayans, upon anything that ever came from Chillicothe, or from a 5 and 10 cent store. Anything that looks like a cat and a goldfish looks like Leo and Pisces, but by due suppression and distortions, there's nothing that can't be made to look like a cat and a goldfish. I fear me, we're turning a little irritable here. To be damned by slumbering giants and interesting little harlots and clowns who rank high in their profession is at least supportable to our vanity. But we find that the anthropologists are of the slums of the divine, or of an archaic kindergarten of intellectuality, and it is very unflattering to find a mess of mouldy infants sitting in judgment upon us. Professor Leslie then finds, as arbitrarily as one might find that some joker put the Brooklyn Bridge where it is, that, quote, the piece was placed there as a practical joke, though not by its present owner, and is a modern fabrication, perhaps of the 16th century, possibly Hispano-American or French-American origin. End quote. Its sheer, brutal attempt to assimilate a thing that may or may not have fallen from the sky with phenomena admitted by the anthropologic system, or with the early French or Spanish explorers of Illinois. Though it is ridiculous in a positive sense to give reasons, it is more acceptable to attempt reasons more nearly real than opposing reasons. Of course, in his favor, we note that Professor Leslie qualifies his notions, but his disregards are that there is nothing either French or Spanish about the coin. A legend upon it is said to be, quote, somewhere between Arabic and Phoenician, without being either, end quote. Professor Winchell, Sparks from a Geologist's Hammer, page 170, says of the crude designs upon this coin, which was in his possession, scrolls of an animal and of a warrior, or of a cat and a goldfish, whichever be convenient, that they had been neither stamped nor engraved, but, quote, looked as if etched with an acid, end quote. That is a method unknown in numismatics of this earth. As to the crudity of the design upon this coin, and something else, that though the warrior may be, by due disregard, either a cat or a goldfish, we have to note that his headdress is typical of the American Indian. Could be explained, of course, but for fear that we might be instantly translated to the positive absolute, which may not be absolutely desirable, we prefer to have some flaws or negativeness in our own expressions. Data of more than the thrice accursed, tablets of stone, with the 10 Commandments engraved upon them in Hebrew, said to have been found in the mounds of the United States. Masonic emblems said to have been found in the mounds in the United States, were upon the borderline of our acceptances, and were amorphous in the uncertainties and mergings of our outline. Conventionally, or with no real reason for doing so, we exclude these things, and then, as grossly and arbitrarily and irrationally, though our attempt is always to approximate away from these negative states, as ever a Kepler, Newton, or Darwin made his selections, without which he could not have seemed to be at all, because every one of them is now seen to be an illusion. We accept that other lettered things have been found in mounds in the United States. Of course, we do what we can to make this selection seem not gross and arbitrary and irrational. Then, if we accept that inscribed things of ancient origin have been found in the United States, that cannot be attributed to any race indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, that are not in any language ever heard of in the Eastern Hemisphere. There's nothing to it but to turn non-Euclidean and try to conceive of a third hemisphere, or to accept that there has been intercourse between the Western Hemisphere and some other world. End of Part A of Chapter 11. Read by J.C. Guan, Montreal, November 2008.
Any Cuba Cobra S combo. Compared to the mainstream 3D printer on the market, Anycubic S1 is faster. The speed has improved 12 times. The Benchy can be completed in 15 minutes, that's 600 millimeters a second. fully enclosed construction using the Cobra OS system and cooling system minimizes vibrations and enhances the responsiveness to improve the quality of printing. Anycubic Cobra S features a full metal hot end capable of reaching a peak temperature of 320 degrees. Quiet mode is as low as 44 decibels while printing. 44 decibels, that's as loud as the library, or bird calls, or a forced air furnace. Equipped with built-in camera to view the printing process. Finally, use my link to save $120. Get the combo and be able to print in 4 to 8 colors. Fast and easy to use. If you have a hobby or a business, you'll find hundreds of uses for your Anycubic printer. Use the show notes to find out anything you want. Get anything you want from Anycubic.
The Book of the Damned by Charles
Thank you,
Ford.
and back to the show.
Chapter 11, Part B. But there is a peculiarity to these inscribed objects. They remind me of the records left by Sir John Franklin in the Arctic, but also of attempts made by relief expeditions to communicate with the Franklin expedition. The lost explorers cached their records or concealed them conspicuously in mounds. The relief expeditions sent up balloons from which messages were dropped broadcast. Our data are of things that have been cached and of things that seem to have been dropped. Or a lost expedition from somewhere, explorers from somewhere and their inability to return, then a long, sentimental, persistent attempt in the spirit of our own Arctic relief expeditions, at least to establish communication. What if it may have succeeded? We think of India, the millions of natives who are ruled by a small band of exoterics, only because they receive support and direction from somewhere else, or from England. In 1838, Mr. A.B. Tomlinson, owner of the great mound at Grave Creek, West Virginia, excavated the mound. He said that, in the presence of witnesses, he had found a small, flat, oval stone, or disc, upon which were engraved alphabetic characters. Colonel Whittlesey, an expert in these matters, says that the stone is now, quote, universally regarded by archaeologists as a fraud, end quote. That, in his opinion, Mr. Tomlinson had been imposed upon. Avebury, Prehistoric Times, page 271. Quote, I mention it because it has been the subject of much discussion, but it is now generally admitted to be a fraud. It is inscribed with Hebrew characters, but the forger has copied the modern instead of the ancient form of the letters. End quote. As I have said, we're as irritable here, under the impression of the anthropologists, as ever were slaves in the South toward superiorities from, quote, poor white trash, end quote. When we finally reverse our relative positions, we shall give lowest place to the anthropologists. A Dr. Gray does at least look at a fish before he conceives of a miraculous origin for it. We shall have to submerge Lord Avebury far below him, if we accept that the stone from Grave Creek is generally regarded as a fraud by eminent authorities who did not know it from some other object, or, in general, that so decided an opinion must be the product of either deliberate disregard, or ignorance, or fatigue. The stone belongs to a class of phenomena that is repulsive to the system. It will not assimilate with the system. Let such an object be heard of by such a systematist as Avebury, and the mere mention of it is as nearly certainly the stimulus to a conventional reaction as is a charged body to an electroscope or a glass of beer to a prohibitionist. It is of the ideals of science to know one object from another before expressing an opinion upon a thing. But that is not the spirit of universal mechanics. A thing, it is attractive or repulsive. Its conventional reaction follows. Because it is not the stone from Grave Creek that is in Hebrew characters, either ancient or modern. It is a stone from Newark, Ohio, of which the story is told that a forger made this mistake of using modern instead of ancient Hebrew characters. We shall see that the inscription upon the Grave Creek stone is not in Hebrew. Or all things are presumed to be innocent, but are supposed to be guilty unless they assimilate. Colonel Whittlesey, Western Reserve Historical Tracts, number 33, says that the Grave Creek stone was considered a fraud by Wilson, Squires, and Davis. Then he comes to the Congress of Archaeologists at Nancy, France, 1875. It is hard for Colonel Whittlesey to admit that, at this meeting, which sounds important, the stone was endorsed. He reminds us of Mr. Simons and the man who considered that he saw something. Colonel Whittlesey's somewhat tortuous expression is that the finder of the stone, quote, so imposed his views, end quote, upon the Congress that it pronounced the stone genuine. Also, the stone was examined by Schoolcraft. He gave his opinion for genuineness. Or, there's only one process, and see-saw is one of its aspects. 3 or 4 fat experts on the side against us. We find 4 or 5 plump ones on our side. Or all that we call logic and reasoning ends up as sheer preponderance or avoirdupois. Then several philologists came out in favor of genuineness. Some of them translated the inscription. Of course, as we have said, it is our method, or the method of orthodoxy, way in which all conclusions are reached, to have some awfully eminent, or preponderantly plump, authorities with us whenever we can. In this case, however, we feel just a little apprehensive in being caught in such excellently obese, but somewhat negativized company. Translation by Mr. John Bird. Thy orders are laws. Thou shinest in impetuous elan and rapid chamois. End quote. Mr. Maurice Schwab, quote, the chief of emigration who reached these places, or this island, has fixed these characters forever. End quote. Mr. Oppert, quote, the grave of one who was assassinated here. May God, to revenge him, strike his murderer, cutting off the hand of his existence. End quote. I like the first one the best. I have such a vivid impression from it of someone polishing up brass or something, and in an awful hurry. Of course, the third is more dramatic. Still, they're all very good. They are perturbations of one another, I suppose. In Tract 44, Colonel Whittlesey returns to the subject. He gives the conclusion of Major de Helward at the Congress of Luxembourg, 1877. Quote, if Professor Red and myself are right in the conclusion that the figures are neither of the runic, Phoenician, Canaanite, Hebrew, Libyan, Celtic, or any other alphabet language, its importance has been greatly overrated. End quote. Obvious to a child, obvious to any mentality not helplessly subjected to a system. That just therein lies the importance of this object. It is said that an ideal of science is to find out the new. But unless a thing be of the old, it is unimportant. Quote, it is not worthwhile, end quote. Hovey. Then the inscribed axe, or wedge, which according to Dr. John C. Evans, in a communication to the American Ethnological Society, was plowed up near Pemberton, New Jersey, 1859. The characters upon this axe, or wedge, are strikingly similar to the characters on the Grave Creek stone. Also, with a little disregard here and a little more there, they look like tracks in the snow by someone who's been out celebrating, or like your handwriting, or mine, when we think there's a certain distinction in illegibility. Method of disregard. Anything's anything. Dr. Abbott describes this object in the Report of the Smithsonian Institution, 1875-260. He says he has no faith in it. All progress is from the outrageous to the commonplace, or quasi-existence proceeds from rape to the crooning of lullabies. It's been interesting to me to go over various long-established periodicals and note controversies between attempting positivist and then intermediatistic issues. Bold, bad intruders of theories, ruffians with dishonorable intentions, the alarms of science, her attempts to preserve that which is dearer than life itself, submission, then a fidelity like Mrs. Micawber's. So many of these ruffians, or wandering comedians that were hated, or scorned, pitied, embraced, conventionalized. There's not a notion in this book that has a more frightful or ridiculous mien that had the notion of human footprints in rocks, when that now respectabilized ruffian or clown was first heard from. It seems bewildering to one whose interests are not scientific that such rows should be raised over such trifles. But the feeling of a systematist toward such an intruder is just about what anyone's would be if a tramp from the street should come in, sit at one's dinner table, and say he belonged there. We know what hypnosis can do. Let him insist with all his might that he does belong there, and one begins to suspect that he may be right, that he may have higher perceptions of what's right. The prohibitionists have this worked out very skillfully. So the row that was raised over the stone from Grave Creek, but time and cumulativeness, and the very factor we make so much of, or the power of massed data. There were other reports of inscribed stones, and then, half a century later, some mounds, or caches, as we call them, were opened by Reverend Mr. Gass, near the city of Davenport, American Antiquarian, 15-73. Several stone tablets were found. Upon one of them, the letters, quote, TFTOWNS, end quote, may easily be made out. In this instance, we hear nothing of fraudulency. Time, cumulativeness, the power of massed data. The attempt to assimilate this datum is that the tablet was probably of Mormon origin. Why? Because at Mendon, Illinois, was found a brass plate, upon which were similar characters. Why that? Because that was found, quote, near a house once occupied by a Mormon, end quote. In a real existence, a real meteorologist, suspecting that cinders had come from a fire engine, would have asked a fireman. Tablets of Davenport. There's not a record findable that it ever occurred to any antiquarian to ask a Mormon. Other tablets were found. Upon one of them are 2 F's and 2 8's. Also a large tablet, 12 inches by 8 to 10 inches, quote, with Roman numerals and Arabic, end quote. It is said that the figure 8 occurs 3 times, and that the figure, or letter O, 7 times. Quote, with these familiar characters are others that resembled ancient alphabets, either Phoenician or Hebrew, end quote. It may be that the discovery of Australia, for instance, will turn out to be less important than the discovery and the meaning of these tablets. But where will you read of them in anything subsequently published? What antiquarian has ever since tried to understand them, and their presence, and indications of antiquity, in a land that we're told was inhabited only by unlettered savages? These things that are exhumed only to be buried in some other way. Another tablet was found at Davenport by Mr. Charles Harrison, President of the American Antiquarian Society. Quote, 8 and other hieroglyphs are upon this tablet." End quote. This time also, fraud is not mentioned. My own notion is that it is very unsportsmanlike ever to mention fraud. Accept anything, then explain it your way. Anything that assimilates with one explanation must have assimilable relations, to some degree, with all other explanations, if all explanations are somewhere continuous. Mormons are lugged in again, but the attempt is faint and helpless. Quote, "Because general circumstances make it difficult to explain the presence of these tablets." End quote. Altogether, our phantom resistance is mere attribution to the Mormons, without the slightest attempt to find base for the attribution. We think of messages that were showered upon this earth, and of messages that were cached in mounds upon this earth. The similarity to the Franklin situation is striking. Conceivably, centuries from now, objects dropped from relief expedition balloons may be found in the Arctic, and conceivably, there are still undiscovered caches left by Franklin in the hope that relief expeditions would find them. It would be as incongruous to attribute these things to the Eskimos as to attribute tablets and lettered stones to the aborigines of America. Sometime I shall take up an expression that the queer-shaped mounds upon this earth were built by explorers from somewhere, unable to get back, designed to attract attention from some other world, and that a vast sword-shaped mound had been discovered upon the moon. Just now, we think of lettered things and their two possible significances. A bizarre little lost soul, rescued from one of the morgues of the American Journal of Science. An account sent by a correspondent to Professor Sullivan of something that was found in a block of marble, taken November 1829, from a quarry near Philadelphia. American Journal of Science 1-19-361. The block was cut into slabs. By this process, it is said, was exposed an indentation in the stone, about 1½ inches by 5/8 of an inch. A geometric indentation. In it were two definite-looking raised letters, like I, U. Only difference is that the corners of the U are not rounded, but are straight angles. We are told that this block of stone came from a depth of 70 or 80 feet, or that, if acceptable, this lettering was done long ago. To some persons not sated with the commonness of the incredible that has to be accepted, it may seem grotesque to think that an indentation in sand could have tons of other sand piled upon it and hardening into stone, without being pressed out. But the famous Nicaraguan footprints were found in a quarry under 11 strata of solid rock. There was no discussion of this datum. We only take it out for an airing. As to lettered stones that may once upon a time have been showered upon Europe, if we cannot accept that the stones were inscribed by indigenous inhabitants of Europe, many have been found in caves, whence they were carried as curiosities by prehistoric men, or as ornaments, I suppose. About the size and shape of the Grave Creek stone or disc, quote, flat and oval and about 2 inches wide, end quote. Solis. Characters painted upon them, found first by Mr. Piet in the cave of Mas d'Azil, Ariège. According to Solis, they are marked in various directions with red and black lines, quote, but on not a few of them more complex characters occur, which in a few instances simulate some of the capital letters of the Roman alphabet, end quote. In one instance, the letters F, E, I, accompanied by no other markings to modify them, are as plain as they could be. According to Solis, Ancient Hunters, page 95, Mr. Cartaillac has confirmed the observations of Piet, and Mr. Boulle has found additional examples. Quote, They offer one of the darkest problems of prehistoric times." End quote. Solus. As to caches in general, I should say that they are made with two purposes: to proclaim and to conceal, or that caches in documents are hidden or covered over in conspicuous structures. At least, so are designed the cairns in the Arctic. Transcripts of the New York Academy of Sciences, 11-27. That Mr. J. H. Hooper, Bradley County, Tennessee, having come upon a curious stone in some woods upon his farm, investigated. He dug. He unearthed a long wall. Upon this wall were inscribed many alphabetic characters. Quote, 872 characters have been examined, many of them duplicates, and a few imitations of animal forms, the moon, and other objects. Accidental imitations of Oriental alphabets are numerous. End quote. The part that seems significant, that these letters had been hidden under a layer of cement. And still, in our own heterogeneity, or unwillingness, or inability to concentrate upon single concepts, we shall, or we shan't, accept that though there may have been a lost colony or lost expedition from somewhere upon this earth, and extra-mundane visitors who could never get back, there have been other extra-mundane visitors who have gone away again, altogether quite in analogy with the Franklin expedition and Peary flittings in the Arctic, and a wreck that occurred to one group of them, and the loot that was lost overboard. The Chinese seals of Ireland. Not the things with the big wistful eyes that lie on ice, and that are taught to balance objects on their noses, but inscribed stamps with which to make impressions. Proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy, 1-381. A paper was read by Mr. J. Hubban Smith, descriptive of about a dozen Chinese seals that have been found in Ireland. They are all alike, each a cube with an animal seated upon it. Quote, it is said that the inscriptions upon them are of a very ancient class of Chinese characters. End quote. The 3 points that have made a leper and an outcast of this datum, but only in the sense of disregard, because nowhere that I know of is it questioned. Agreement among archaeologists is that there were no relations in the remote past between China and Ireland, that no other objects from ancient China, virtually I suppose, have ever been found in Ireland. The great distance at which these seals have been found apart. After Mr. Smith's investigations, if he did investigate, or do more than record, many more Chinese seals were found in Ireland, and, with one exception, only in Ireland. In 1852, about 60 had been found. Of all archaeologic finds in Ireland, quote, none is enveloped in greater mystery, end quote. Chambers Journal, 16-364. According to the writer in Chambers Journal, one of these seals was found in a curiosity shop in London. When questioned, the shopkeeper said that it had come from Ireland. In this instance, if you don't take instinctively to our expression, there is no orthodox explanation for your preference. It is the astonishing scattering of them, over field and forest, that has hushed the explainers. In the Proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy, 10-171, Dr. Fraser says that they, quote, appear to have been sown broadcast over the county in some strange way that I cannot offer a solution of, end quote. The struggle for expression of a notion that did not belong to Dr. Fraser's era. Quote, the invariable story of their find is what we might expect if they had been accidentally dropped, end quote. 3 were found in Tipperary, 6 in Cork, 3 in Down, 4 in Waterford, all of the rest 1 or 2 to a county. But one of these Chinese seals was found in the bed of the river Boyne, near Colnard, Meath, when workmen were raising gravel. That one, at least, had been dropped there. End of Chapter 11. Read by J.C. Guan. Montreal, November 2008.